Hi there. I figure since we are very, very close into the descent of fascism, with all of the bullshit going on with the presidential election, COVID-19, everything going on, Proud Boys, all that shit, I figured we'd take a look into history and see how fascism developed in Japan as a result of the mass crisis of the Great Depression. I'm going to be reading a short essay that I wrote for a class that I took studying the history of Japan all the way up until the modern day, which was in my 7th semester of college. With few exceptions, such as the Soviet Union, the Great Depression of the 1930s effectively decimated the world economy at levels previously unseen. This degradation of the world economic sphere affected Japan, at least more explicitly, in a distinct manner, resulting in the descent into the fascist wormhole. In order to address the hardships brought on by the economic collapse, the United States adopted means in line with social democracy, known to some as the left wing of fascism, whereas Japan moved upon the path from a decaying free market capitalism into the realm of autocracy and reactionary politics and economics. The emergence of fascist tendencies in the Japanese realm stems from the rise of social crises in line with the worldwide crisis of a crashing capitalism. Similar to the events that unfolded in the US, a great deal of what initiated this economic detriment stemmed from banking practices and a general sense of corruption. The zaibatsu, which were essentially banks that acted as a monopoly of multiplied strength through direct corporate connections and ownership, served as one of the main catalysts in the fascist decay of Japan. In the pursuit of profit, members of these highly monopolistic banks were engaging in trade that brought an individual profit at the expense of the general working class. Following the devaluation of the yen, bankers sought a new method to further bolster their riches, to quote the text that this essay is based off of. The banks happily doubled their money by repurchasing the cheaper Japanese currency with their dollars. This behavior reinforced the widespread belief that capitalists and their allies in the political parties were greedy and selfish, which cannot be more true. Economic detriment, as one could infer, affected the working class and other impoverished sections of the Japanese population at a much higher and stronger rate than the Japanese bourgeoisie. Farmers who rented their homes or their land had faced a fall in the prices of their crops, and the economic crash essentially destroyed their livelihood, making survival ever the more difficult. Japanese fascism, despite its distinctions, draws a number of parallels to the fascism as orchestrated by the likes of Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini. In spite of the resistance towards capitalism as exemplified through the cries of the middle class in Japan and the idea that the Seiyukai, the ruling power of Japan pre-World War II, and the Minseito, also known as the Constitutional Democratic Party, were the running dogs of big capital. There were there were a variety of campaigns to shut down and thus prevent any movements that may be even slightly synonymous with Marxism or socialism or communism in general. As the communists had been some of the first forced into the German concentration camps, so too were the leftists one of the first otherized groups en route to a fascist government in Japan. In particular, student movements had become rather prevalent against both issues surrounding the individual campuses themselves and national issues in the late 1920s to early 30s. Any deviation from norms of the status quo that even directly challenged the progression of a reactionary state capitalism overall, honestly, they were seen as communist dissidents. This is most strongly exemplified in the mass arrest of both students and members of the Tokyo University New Man Society, as officials were suspicious that numerous students and members had either connections to or were also members, presumably of the Japanese Communist Party or some other leftist movement. The political scapegoating of these students represents not only an economic descent into fascism, but a cultural one as well. A pivotal aspect of fascism is the rejection of degeneracy. This degeneracy, however, normally is composed of simple generational changes in culture, and thus a break from traditionalism, as often found within fascist thought. While there were some who considered the culmination of Japanese fascism itself to be a challenge to the status quo created in Japan, which was the emerging modern girl and modern boy, which was essentially young people embracing certain aspects of Western culture, such as how one dresses, or the rise of, the nightlife, clubbing, and whatnot. In essence, the rejection of these modernizations acted as a means of enforcing the traditionalism that later became more fully embraced in Japanese society, citing the rise in waitresses and the reactionary parallels drawn between waitresses and prostitutes, which signified to them a decline in societal standards and thus a threat to the perceived purity of the Japanese woman. The details of what fascism truly is go far beyond the societal and economic events that I've covered. However, analyzing the early stages allows for a better identification of fascism's resurgence in the modern era, see Ukraine and the United States, for example. Japanese fascism, while holding similar tendencies to German and Italian fascist practices, and arguably Spain under Franco, because is Franco fascist or proto-fascist, but that's neither here nor there. Japanese fascism held distinctions in the structure of their economy, and how material conditions resulted in the culmination of Japanese fascism. Nonetheless, the decay of Japanese capitalism further exemplifies the cyclic crises of capitalism in practice and the societal effects of such crises. And there you have it, folks. I figured that with everything going on, the Breonna Taylor George Floyd situation, the police brutality protest, the election, the coronavirus, every fucking crazy thing that's been going on for the past 9-10 months, I figured a little dive into history to study how fascism developed and how it took over in Japan before World War II. I figured that'd be a little good lesson to reflect on. I'm actually very happy to be doing these again on video. I like doing the audio-only ones too, but just editing those can be very, very tedious, and doing actual on-camera is just a little easier for me to edit. So I think I'm going to be trying to jump back into doing these more again. My name is Jymee. Thank you for watching.